For the next 6 hours, I need you to be my husband. If you say no, my entire life changes the second this plane lands." I thought she was joking. People didn't board cross-country flights with movie lines like that, especially not at 7:30 on a rainy Tuesday morning at JFK. I had just settled into seat 12B, tucked my backpack beneath the seat in front of me, and congratulated myself for arriving early enough to avoid the usual airport chaos. My name is Ethan Brooks, and I build software that nobody notices unless it stops working. My life runs on calendars, coffee, and carefully planned routines. I don't gamble, I don't chase excitement, and I definitely don't get involved in strangers' problems. That was the plan anyway. The woman beside me hadn't even looked at me when she first sat down in seat 12A. She wore a navy blazer over a cream-colored sweater, practical sneakers instead of heels, and her dark blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail that suggested she'd been rushing all morning. Nothing about her screamed drama. She looked like someone traveling for work, just another exhausted passenger hoping for a quiet flight to Seattle. She placed a small leather carry-on beneath the seat, buckled her seatbelt, and stared out the oval window as raindrops slid across the glass. Then she quietly exhaled, almost like she had been holding her breath for hours. I pulled out my tablet, ready to finish reviewing tomorrow's presentation before we took off. A flight attendant welcomed passengers over the speakers while people shuffled down the aisle searching for overhead bin space. A toddler somewhere behind us protested the existence of seatbelts. Everything felt ordinary, comfortably ordinary. Then the woman beside me leaned closer without actually looking at me. "Whatever happens after they close the cabin door," she whispered, "please don't act surprised." I turned toward her, assuming I'd misheard. Before I could ask what she meant, she finally met my eyes. They were an unusual shade of gray, calm on the surface, but carrying the unmistakable look of someone calculating 10 steps ahead. She smiled politely, the kind of smile people use in family photos, when they're trying not to worry everyone else. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know this sounds impossible." I laughed once, awkwardly. Usually that's not the sentence people open with. She almost smiled back, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Her attention shifted past me toward the boarding door. I followed her gaze. A tall man had just entered the aircraft. Nothing about him looked threatening. He wore a charcoal sport coat, carried a slim black briefcase, and greeted the flight attendant with an easy smile before slowly scanning the rows ahead. Business traveler, I thought. Perfectly normal. Yet beside me, the woman had gone completely still. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse just enough for her knuckles to pale. She lowered her voice until I could barely hear it over the cabin announcements. "His name doesn't matter," she murmured. "What matters is that he cannot believe I'm traveling alone." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She finally faced me completely. "My name is Olivia Carter." She took one slow breath. "And for the next 6 hours, I need you to pretend you're my husband." The question sat between us for barely a heartbeat before the man in the charcoal sport coat started walking down the aisle. He did not rush. That was somehow worse. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who never expected doors to stay closed for long. Olivia noticed him before I did. Her breathing remained steady, but every other detail betrayed her. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer for the third time in less than a minute. Her eyes stayed fixed on the safety card in the seat pocket as though reading it required complete concentration. Then, without warning, her hand slipped gently around my arm. I stiffened. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder and let out the kind of comfortable sigh that sounded practiced rather than spontaneous. If anyone had looked our way, they would have seen an ordinary married couple waiting for departure. I looked down at her, completely lost. She did not move her lips when she whispered, "Please trust me for 2 minutes." The flight attendant approached with a bright smile. "Good morning. Can I offer either of you something before takeoff?" Before I could answer, Olivia smiled warmly. "Water for me. And he always takes black coffee if you still have some available after departure." I stared at her. I had not told her that. Black coffee was exactly what I drank on every flight. She caught the expression on my face without turning toward me. "Smile," she murmured under her breath. Married people smile. I forced something that probably looked more like confusion than happiness. The flight attendant chuckled. "You two are adorable. First trip together." Olivia laughed softly. "Not even close. We still argue about who gets the window seat. She always wins." I heard myself say before my brain approved the sentence. The flight attendant grinned and continued down the aisle. Olivia squeezed my arm once, almost imperceptibly, as if thanking me. The man in the charcoal jacket slowed beside our row. His eyes landed on Olivia first. For one uncomfortable second, nobody spoke. Then his expression relaxed into an easy smile. "Olivia," he said pleasantly. "I thought that was you." She lifted her head from my shoulder just enough to meet his gaze. "Hello, Daniel." Her voice carried none of the fear I had sensed moments earlier. It sounded calm, almost cheerful. Small world. His attention shifted to me. I stood halfway out of instinct and offered my hand. "Ethan Brooks." He accepted the handshake. His grip was firm but brief. "Daniel Hayes, friend of Olivia's family." Something about the way he emphasized the word family made the air feel heavier. "Pleasure to meet you," I replied. Olivia slipped her hand into mine before either man released the conversation. Her fingers were cool, but they held mine naturally, like we had done it 1,000 times. "Ethan and I decided to make this trip together at the last minute," she said. "It has been difficult finding time away from work lately." Daniel looked at our joined hands, then back at Olivia. A smile appeared on his face, polite but impossible to read. "Congratulations," he said. "I did not realize you were married." Olivia answered without hesitation. "Most people do not. We prefer keeping our personal life private." The captain's voice interrupted over the speakers, announcing that boarding was complete and the aircraft door had officially closed. I expected Daniel to leave, but instead he held my gaze for another long second before nodding. "Enjoy the flight," he said quietly. "I am sure we will have another chance to talk after we land." He continued toward the front of the cabin. Only after he disappeared behind the curtains separating business class from first class did Olivia release my hand. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered words that made my stomach tighten all over again. "That bought us 6 hours. Now I have to tell you why I chose you." The engines rumbled beneath the cabin floor, pressing me gently into my seat as the aircraft rolled away from the gate. Outside, rain streaked across the windows until the city blurred into soft gray smudges. Around us, conversations faded beneath the steady safety demonstration. People reached for headphones, magazines, and travel pillows. Everyone settled into the familiar rhythm of a long flight. Everyone except the two strangers pretending to share a life together. Olivia kept watching the cabin door until the airplane lifted into the clouds. Only when the seatbelt sign remained illuminated and the skyline disappeared beneath a blanket of white did her shoulders finally relax. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and looked straight ahead. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You had every reason to walk away." I let out a slow breath that I had apparently been holding since boarding. "You still have not explained why you picked me." She nodded once. "I know." For several seconds, she remained silent, almost as if organizing hundreds of thoughts before choosing the safest ones to share. "You believe we met by accident." She looked at me with a faint, apologetic smile. "We did not." My heart skipped. "What does that mean?" She reached into her purse and removed a folded boarding pass. Instead of showing me the front, she flipped it over. On the back, written neatly in blue ink, was my full name, Ethan Brooks. Underneath, it was the seat number, 12B. I stared at the handwriting, then at her. "How did you know where I was sitting?" "Because I made sure I was sitting beside you." Every answer somehow created 2 more questions. "You planned this?" "Yes." "Why me?" She hesitated again. "Because out of everyone on this airplane, you were the only person I believed would still listen before making a judgment." I almost laughed. "You know absolutely nothing about me." A tiny smile returned to her face. "You think so?" Before I could respond, the beverage cart rolled toward us. The same cheerful flight attendant recognized us immediately. "How is my favorite couple doing?" she asked with an easy grin. Olivia answered naturally, thanking her for the water. The attendant handed me a cup of black coffee without asking. "Your wife remembered exactly how you take it." She winked playfully before continuing down the aisle. I looked at the coffee, then back at Olivia. "You really did your homework." She lowered her eyes. "More than you realize." I should have been angry. Instead, curiosity kept pushing aside common sense. "Start at the beginning," I said. "Who are you really?" She looked through the window where endless white clouds stretched beneath us like frozen waves. 3 months ago, my father died." Her voice remained calm, but something inside it sounded impossibly tired. He built a company that became much larger than either of us ever wanted. The day after the funeral, people stopped treating me like his daughter and started treating me like a signature on legal documents. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Every meeting came with advice. Every phone call came with conditions. Every invitation had an agenda. She turned toward me again. Daniel believes he is helping protect my future. Everyone else probably believes the same thing. They all think they know what is best for me. And you disagree. I do. She glanced toward the curtain leading to first class before lowering her voice again. I needed one uninterrupted day to make my own decision before anyone else could make it for me. I frowned. You still have not answered the biggest question. She held my gaze without blinking. I chose you because 1 year ago you did something kind for someone you believed you would never see again. I searched her face for recognition, but found only quiet certainty. Ethan, she whispered gently, you just do not remember that someone was me. Her words settled over me more heavily than the seatbelt across my lap. I searched every corner of my memory, hoping her face would suddenly connect to a forgotten afternoon or an overlooked conversation, but nothing came. I hated that feeling. I was usually the kind of person who remembered names, birthdays, and random details people casually mentioned months earlier. Yet this woman claimed I had changed her life, and I could not even remember meeting her. I am sorry, I admitted quietly. I really do not remember. Olivia nodded as though she had expected that answer all along. I never blamed you for it. She looked down at the paper cup of water resting on her tray table, slowly turning it between her fingers. It was just another ordinary day for you. She smiled faintly. For me, it was the day everything stopped falling apart. I waited. Outside the window, bright sunlight now poured across endless clouds, making it almost impossible to believe there had ever been a storm below us. The captain announced we had reached cruising altitude, and passengers immediately began opening laptops, watching movies, or drifting to sleep. The ordinary calm of the cabin felt strangely disconnected from the conversation unfolding in row 12. Last summer, Olivia began. My car broke down outside a small bookstore in Connecticut. I blinked. Westport. Her smile grew just enough to reveal genuine surprise. You do remember the bookstore? Images slowly surfaced. A Saturday afternoon. A neighborhood bookstore with a tiny coffee shop attached. An overheated sedan parked across the street with its hazard lights flashing. A frustrated woman standing beside it while talking to someone on the phone. I helped push a car into a parking space. I murmured. Exactly. She nodded. You spent almost an hour helping a complete stranger after everyone else walked past. More details returned. I remembered calling roadside assistance because the woman had almost no phone battery left. I remembered buying 2 iced coffees while we waited for the tow truck because it had been nearly 90 degrees outside. I remembered telling her that bad days usually ended eventually, even if they did not feel that way in the moment. I had never learned her last name. I had not expected to see her again. That was you, I whispered. Olivia laughed softly. You still apologized because you thought the coffee was too sweet. I shook my head in disbelief. I cannot believe this. Neither could I when I saw your name on the passenger list. Before I could ask another question, a soft chime echoed through the cabin. A flight attendant stopped beside our row. Mr. Brooks? She asked pleasantly. A gentleman in first class would like to invite you both to join him for a drink after lunch if you are interested. Olivia's smile disappeared so quickly that only I seemed to notice. I looked at the attendant. The gentleman's name? Mr. Hayes. The answer hung in the air. Olivia thanked the attendant before I could respond. Please let him know we appreciate the invitation, but my husband promised we would spend the flight together. The flight attendant smiled. I will pass that along. She walked away, leaving silence behind her. I turned toward Olivia. He is testing us. Yes. He wants to see if our story changes. Yes. I rubbed a hand across my face. You still have not explained why he cares whether you are married. Olivia looked toward the front of the aircraft once more before reaching into her purse. This time she removed a slim white envelope sealed with dark blue wax. She held it carefully for several seconds before placing it in my hands. Because, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, everything he thinks belongs to him disappears the moment this envelope is opened after we land. I stared at the envelope resting in my hands as though it might explain itself if I looked long enough. The dark blue wax seal carried an elegant crest I did not recognize, a circle surrounding a soaring hawk. It felt heavier than paper should. "What is inside?" I asked. Olivia folded her hands together again. "The future." I looked at her, waiting for a smile that never came. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can safely give until we land." My curiosity was quickly giving way to frustration. "You asked a complete stranger to pretend to be your husband, involve me in whatever this is, and now you are asking me to trust an envelope I cannot even open." She met my eyes with remarkable calm. "I am asking you to trust the same instinct that made you stop for a stranger outside a bookstore." I leaned back in my seat, letting out a quiet sigh. That instinct usually comes with fewer secrets. A small laugh escaped her. It was the first genuine laugh I had heard from her all day. And for a moment, she looked less like someone carrying the weight of an impossible decision and more like the woman standing beside a broken-down car under the summer sun. "That is fair," she admitted. Lunch service began a few minutes later. The aroma of warm rolls and roasted chicken drifted through the cabin as flight attendants rolled the carts down the aisle. Around us, passengers chatted, watched movies, and stretched their legs. If someone had taken a photograph of row 12, they would have seen an ordinary couple sharing a quiet meal. Nobody would have guessed every casual smile was part of an agreement made less than an hour earlier. Halfway through lunch, Olivia surprised me again. "You still hate mushrooms," she said, noticing I had pushed them aside without thinking. I froze. "How did you know that?" "Because you apologized to the waitress at the bookstore cafe before asking if she could leave them off your sandwich." I blinked several times. "You remember that?" "I remember almost everything about that day." Her answer carried no embarrassment, only quiet honesty. Before I could respond, a shadow paused beside our row. Daniel stood in the aisle with a relaxed smile and a coffee cup in his hand. "I hope I am not interrupting." Olivia looked up pleasantly. "Not at all." He glanced toward the envelope on my tray table. My hand instinctively rested over it. His eyes noticed the movement immediately, though his smile never changed. "Settling into married life already?" he joked. "Protecting each other's belongings?" I forced a light laugh. "Old habit, I guess." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That is interesting." He looked directly at me. "How long have the two of you been together?" The question sounded harmless, but I immediately understood what Olivia had meant. This was another test. Without missing a beat, she reached over and brushed an invisible crumb from my sleeve. "Almost 2 years," she answered. "He still forgets where he leaves his keys." I smiled despite myself. "Because someone keeps reorganizing the apartment." Olivia rolled her eyes playfully. "Because someone thinks the kitchen counter is a filing cabinet." Daniel watched us carefully. For a second I forgot we were pretending. The conversation flowed with an ease that surprised even me. Then Daniel gave a satisfied nod. "It is good to see you happy, Olivia." He stepped back into the aisle. "Enjoy the rest of your flight." He disappeared toward first class once again. I waited until the curtain closed behind him before looking at Olivia. Did we convince him? She remained silent for several seconds, studying the empty aisle where he had vanished. Finally, she shook her head very slowly. "No," she whispered. "I think he just confirmed something much worse." The words lingered between us long after Daniel disappeared behind the curtain. I studied Olivia's face, searching for panic, but found only quiet disappointment. It was the expression of someone whose worst suspicion had finally become reality. "What did he confirm?" I asked. She looked down at her untouched dessert before answering. "He stopped trying to prove we are lying." I frowned. "Is that supposed to be good?" She slowly shook her head. "No. It means he has already changed his plan." That answer settled like a weight in my chest. "I am starting to notice a pattern," I said. "Every answer somehow becomes another mystery." She gave me an apologetic smile. "I know. I wish it did not have to." The lunch trays disappeared, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly as many passengers closed their window shades. Soft engine noise filled the silence while movies flickered across dozens of seatback screens. It felt strangely peaceful, yet my mind refused to settle. I looked again at the sealed envelope resting safely inside the seat pocket. "Tell me one thing honestly," I said. "If I had refused to help you before takeoff, what would you have done?" Olivia did not answer immediately. She watched a little girl a few rows ahead coloring with bright crayons while her father quietly helped her stay inside the lines. Finally, she whispered, "I would have boarded anyway." "Alone?" Yes. Even knowing Daniel was here. Yes. Then why ask me at all? She turned toward me with surprising warmth in her eyes. Because there is a difference between surviving something and facing it completely alone. I had no response to that. A few moments later, she reached into her purse again, but this time she removed something much smaller than the envelope. It was an old folded receipt, its edges softened by time. She carefully handed it to me. Across the top, I recognized the faded logo of the bookstore cafe in Connecticut. Below it, in my own handwriting, were 7 simple words. Things always look different after a good night's sleep. I stared at the note, stunned. I wrote this. You did. She smiled gently. The tow truck finally arrived, and I was embarrassed for crying over everything happening in my life. You wrote those words before you left because you said people sometimes need something hopeful to find in their pocket later. I laughed quietly, almost in disbelief. That sounds like something my mother used to say. Then she must be a remarkable woman. I folded the receipt carefully and handed it back. I never expected anyone to keep something like that. Neither did I. Her fingers closed around it, as though protecting something far more valuable than paper. But that afternoon reminded me that kindness without expectation still exists. Before either of us spoke again, the captain's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into Seattle earlier than expected due to favorable winds. We should be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. Olivia's smile faded. She looked out the window where the clouds had begun to break apart, revealing distant mountains beneath the afternoon sun. 40 minutes, she murmured. Everything changes in 40 minutes. My pulse quickened. Then open the envelope now. She looked at me with quiet certainty. I cannot. Why? Because it was never meant for me. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. She slowly reached across the armrest and placed the sealed envelope into my hands once again. Ethan, she said softly, my father did not leave this message for his daughter. He left it for the first person she would trust more than fear. Somehow, after everything that happened, that person became you. The envelope felt unexpectedly warm in my hands, not because of the cabin temperature, but because of what Olivia had just said. I looked from the unbroken blue wax seal to her steady gray eyes, hoping she would smile and admit this had all been an elaborate misunderstanding. She never did. Your father left this for me? I asked quietly. He did not know me. No, she answered. But he knew the kind of person I would choose when I finally trusted someone. I let that sink in while the engines hummed beneath us. Somewhere farther back in the cabin, someone laughed at a movie. A baby cried for only a moment before being comforted. Life continued as though nothing unusual was happening at 35,000 feet. How could he possibly predict that? I asked. Olivia reached into her purse once more and removed a slim photograph. It showed an older man with kind eyes standing beside a younger Olivia in front of a lakeside cabin. Both were laughing about something outside the frame. My father believed character is predictable, she said softly. He used to tell me that circumstances change people much less than choices do. She handed me the photograph. After I told him about the man who stayed with a stranger in 90-degree heat until the tow truck arrived, he asked more questions. I looked up. You told your father about me? She nodded. Not your name. I never knew it. I simply described everything you did that afternoon. Her smile returned, small but genuine. He listened very carefully. And that was enough? Apparently. She glanced toward the envelope. A few weeks before he passed away, he added one final instruction to his estate. He said that if I ever found the man from the bookstore, I was to trust him before I trusted anyone asking me to make a decision quickly. I stared at her in disbelief. That sounds impossible. I thought so too. She folded the photograph carefully and returned it to her purse. Until I saw your name on the passenger list yesterday. My thoughts raced in every direction at once. You mean yesterday was not the first time you knew I would be on this flight? No, she looked almost embarrassed. I changed my ticket after I saw your reservation. How? The airline has a corporate partnership with my father's company. She sighed. One of the few privileges I actually wish I did not have. I leaned back, trying to understand how an ordinary business trip had become the strangest day of my life. So your entire plan depended on whether I agreed to help. Not entirely. She smiled faintly. I also hoped you had not suddenly become a terrible person in the last year. I laughed before I could stop myself. That is a lot of pressure. I know. For the first time since boarding, the conversation felt almost normal. Two people talking instead of two strangers performing roles. Then my eyes drifted toward the front of the cabin. The curtain separating first class shifted slightly. Daniel stood there for only a second before disappearing again. He had not approached us. He had only looked. Olivia noticed him too. The warmth in her expression faded instantly. "He is waiting," she whispered. "For what?" "For the moment we land." I looked at the sealed envelope once more. "Then maybe we should stop waiting too." She studied me carefully. "What are you thinking?" I took a slow breath and closed my fingers around the envelope. "I think your father trusted the wrong thing." Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" I looked directly at her. "He did not trust a stranger. He trusted the woman who chose one." The airplane began its gradual descent through a layer of soft gray clouds, and the cabin lights brightened as if encouraging everyone to wake from their quiet routines. Window shades lifted one by one, revealing the deep green forests and shimmering waterways surrounding Seattle. Seatbacks clicked upright. Laptops disappeared into bags. Conversations returned in low, cheerful voices about connecting flights, family visits, and weekend plans. For everyone else, landing meant going home. For Olivia, it meant walking into a future she had spent months trying to avoid. She looked out the window for a long moment before speaking. "I used to love flying," she said quietly. "When I was little, my father always told me that clouds looked different depending on what people carried in their hearts." I smiled faintly. "What did he say yours looked like?" She laughed softly. "He said mine always looked like possibilities." She turned toward me. "Today they feel like deadlines." I rested my hand over the envelope still tucked safely inside the seat pocket. "Whatever happens after we land, you do not have to face it alone anymore." The words surprised even me. 12 hours earlier, I had been thinking about presentation slides and hotel reservations. Now I was promising support to someone I barely knew. Yet somehow it felt completely natural. Olivia searched my face as though making certain I truly meant it. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you still helping?" I thought about the question longer than I expected. Because somewhere between New York and Seattle, this stopped feeling like pretending. Her eyes softened, and for the first time since we met, the tension left her shoulders completely. She did not answer with words. Instead, she simply smiled, and it was different from every careful smile she had worn throughout the flight. This one reached her eyes. Before either of us could say anything else, the captain announced that the cabin crew should prepare for landing. Seatbelts clicked into place across the aircraft. A flight attendant walked by with one final friendly reminder to secure all personal belongings. As she reached our row, she smiled warmly. "I hope you two have a wonderful time in Seattle." Olivia thanked her, and I found myself doing the same without hesitation. A few minutes later, Daniel emerged from first class once again. This time he stopped beside us without speaking immediately. His expression remained calm, almost pleasant. "Safe flight?" he asked. "Very," I replied. He nodded once before looking at Olivia. "There will be a car waiting outside." She met his gaze steadily. "I already have transportation arranged." His smile barely changed. "Plans can change. So can people," she answered. For the first time all day, Daniel's confident expression faltered by the smallest fraction. He looked at me instead. "Mr. Brooks, I hope you realize that unexpected situations often become more complicated than they first appear." I smiled politely. "Sometimes they also become better than expected." He held my gaze for another quiet second before giving a respectful nod. "Perhaps." Without another word, he returned to the front of the aircraft. Olivia released a slow breath. You did not have to answer him. I wanted to. The landing gear extended with a deep mechanical rumble beneath us. The runway came into view through the window, stretching toward the horizon. As the aircraft touched down with a gentle bounce and applause scattered through the cabin, something inside me settled too. This story had begun with a stranger asking for 6 hours of borrowed trust. Now those 6 hours were ending. Passengers stood as soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, reaching for suitcases and jackets. I retrieved my backpack, while Olivia carefully picked up her carry-on. Then I reached into the seat pocket and held the sealed envelope between us. "Before we leave this airplane," I said quietly, "there is one decision I want to make without reading whatever is inside." Olivia looked at me with quiet curiosity. "What decision?" I smiled. "No matter what that letter says, I am walking out of this airport beside you because that is no longer part of the act." We stepped off the airplane together without saying much. The crowded jet bridge echoed with rolling suitcases, quiet conversations, and the familiar sounds of travelers eager to reach baggage claim. Somewhere ahead, Daniel disappeared into the flow of passengers without looking back. He no longer seemed interested in following us. That alone told Olivia more than any conversation could have. He knows, she whispered. He knows he cannot rush me anymore. We walked through the terminal side by side until we found a quiet seating area overlooking the runways. Airplanes rose into the late afternoon sky one after another, each carrying strangers toward lives they could not yet imagine. Olivia looked at the envelope resting in my hands. "This is where my father wanted it opened," she said. "Not in the air. Not at the airport entrance. Somewhere calm." I nodded and carefully broke the blue wax seal. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. The paper carried the slight yellow tint of something written months earlier. I unfolded it slowly. The first line immediately caught my attention. "If you are reading this, then my daughter has finally trusted someone because she wanted to, not because she was told to." I glanced at Olivia before continuing aloud. "My dear Olivia, if life has brought you to this moment, then I have already missed more days with you than I ever wished. There will be many people who tell you what responsibility looks like. Some will confuse loyalty with obedience. Others will confuse protection with control. Do not let them decide your future simply because they speak confidently. The only people worth building a life beside are those who make you feel more like yourself instead of less. If the person reading this with you is willing to stand beside you without expecting anything in return, then listen to that person's advice before listening to lawyers, executives, or old family friends. Companies can be rebuilt. Reputations can recover. A peaceful life is much harder to replace once you have traded it away." I stopped reading for a moment. Olivia quietly wiped away a tear before smiling through it. "That sounds exactly like him," she whispered. I continued until the final sentence. "And Olivia, if the stranger who once helped you on an ordinary summer afternoon has somehow found his way back into your life, then perhaps destiny has better timing than either of us ever understood." I folded the letter carefully. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt complete. Finally, Olivia laughed softly. "I spent months believing I had to choose between my future and my freedom." She looked at the airplanes outside the window before turning back to me. "Maybe I just needed enough courage to choose for myself." I smiled. "What are you going to do now?" She took a slow breath. "I am going to lead the company the way my father hoped I would. On my terms. If people stay, wonderful. If they leave, I will still know the decisions were mine." I nodded. "That sounds like the Olivia I met outside a bookstore." She laughed again. "The Olivia you forgot." "Fair point." We both smiled. A comfortable silence settled between us once more before she looked at me with the same calm gray eyes that had first met mine in seat 12. "Can I ask you one last favor?" "Of course. Would you let our next conversation begin without pretending we are married?" I laughed. "I would actually prefer that." She tilted her head with a playful smile. "Good. Because I was hoping our first real date could start with coffee instead of an emergency." "Black coffee?" I asked. "Still no mushrooms," she replied. We walked out of the terminal together as the evening sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and blue. This time there were no rehearsed smiles, no invented stories, and no borrowed promises. Somewhere above us, another flight disappeared into the clouds, carrying strangers toward unexpected beginnings. Ours had already arrived.